Hi, my name is Nathan. This is Nice at Dice, and today I am talking about Legacy of Dragonholt. This is a game for 1 to 6 players. It is essentially a choose-your-own-adventure story that you play through cooperatively, or you can play it by yourself, and it takes you through an adventure in the world of Terranoth, which is a sort of fantasy adventure world from Fantasy Flight Games. It's the same world that some of their other games like Descent and Runebound are based in. It's largely your sort of standard fantasy fare with elves and dwarves and so forth. And you are going to venture to this town of Dragonholt, and you are going to investigate a sort of mystery / conspiracy and try to save the day. So I've been playing this game. It's a game that takes multiple sessions to play through the story. So my sister and I have been playing it. It took us 8 sessions to get through the entire story. So that gives you an idea right away about sort of the scope and the length of the game. And there were definitely some things that we didn't experience. There's a lot of little subplots taking place in the story that you can choose to explore or not. And I don't think you would really have time to explore all of those little subplots in a single run through of the campaign. So there's a lot of material there. And I've been contemplating this review for some time because as soon as I played it the first time, I had some thoughts about it, but I figured I needed to play it some more to kind of get some more thoughts. And the second time I played it, I had very different thoughts about it. And the third time I played it, even some different thoughts about it. And so I've been putting off the review until I've completed the entire campaign and had sort of the whole breadth of the experience. So now that I've done that, I want to review this game. I'm going to start by kind of walking you through what the game is, how it works. I'm going to give you some of my thoughts on it. Because it is a very narrative-based game, it will be hard to explain all of my thoughts on it without giving any spoilers. So for the first part of this video, I'm going to try and keep it very light on spoilers. But then towards the end of the video, I am going to go into some spoilers, but I will make sure you know before I go into the spoilers. So if you don't want to be spoiled on the game, you can stop watching the video at that point. Anyhow, all of that being said, let's go ahead and get into this. I'll show you a little bit about how the game works, and then we'll talk about some of the pros and cons of Legacy of Dragonholt. So I figure I'll start by walking you through just what is in the box when you get the game and open it up. You're going to find these little tokens. These are called activation tokens. There's 6 of them, 1 for each player if you're playing with up to 6 people. I'll explain a little bit about what those do in a minute. You also get some item cards. These are a set of cards that are labeled with letters, and they encourage you not to look through the deck, but to just pull the cards out as you are told to as you work your way through the narrative. There's a good variety of different items in here. Some of them have actual in-game effects. Some of them are just there for narrative purposes. I'll show you an example of one card that you get very early in the game, so it's not a big spoiler, but just so you have an idea how these cards might work. This is a healing potion. All of the cards are sort of like this in that they have an illustration, they have a little bit of flavor text here, and they have the in-game ability. So all of the cards are sort of like that, and you collect these as you play through the game. When we were playing through it, I had an extra plastic bag that I kept in the box, and so I would separate out the items that we had into that plastic bag, and it made it very simple as we were packing things away and getting ready for our next session. We could just pull out the cards that we had already collected. You're also going to have this letter that you get early on in the game. Actually, from the very beginning you have this. And I will say this is pretty cool. It's a neat little prop, basically. It's a letter that sort of introduces the mystery of the story that you're trying to solve. And so that was kind of neat that they gave you an actual physical prop of that instead of just, describing it or relaying it. And then before you get too far into the game, you're going to be given this. This is somebody's journal, and it's written out in this text that looks kind of like handwriting. It's not real lengthy, but it took us maybe 20-30 minutes to read through all the entries, and it's basically going to give you some clues about the mystery that you're trying to solve. You're also going to get a map of Dragonholt. I'll show you this a little bit later. And then you get right into the books. So first we have a rulebook, which you're told to read first. This is a very slim book. Basically, they just ask you to read through these 2 pages at the beginning, and then they tell you to get right into the game. And the rest of the book is a glossary of different rules, and they are categorized alphabetically, so it's very easy to look up rules if you have questions during the game. I think in 8 sessions, we only had questions about the rules maybe 3 or 4 times. So the rules are very simple, and they're very intuitive, but this is a nice setup for the rule book. It's a very useful reference. And one of the first things that the rulebook will tell you to do before you really get started on the game proper is it'll tell you to go to this book, which is for character creation. And this book walks you through creating your character. So I had played some choose your own adventure style games in the past where you essentially are given a character that you're playing, or you are just playing as yourself, imagining yourself in that situation. So this was a little bit different, having you create a character. This kind of reminds me a little bit of a role-playing game. I've played a lot of role-playing games, but again, much simpler, much more streamlined. So basically they give you a number of races you can choose from: humans, orcs, dwarves, elves, gnomes, and catfolk. And then they give you a number of classes you can choose from, anything from an apothecary to a knight, a sage, a wildlander, a thief, etc. Then you do a physical description of your character. You make some notes about their personality and ideals and their background. And then you choose your skills, and the skills are basically the main bulk of your character. These 2 pages list all of the skills, so there are quite a few skills to choose from. And here's your character sheet. You can make copies of this to create your character on. It's pretty straightforward. The bottom half of the sheet is just for your notes about your character, their background, personality, physical description. You can list the items that you get here, although again, like I said, we found it easier to just separate the cards out that we got and keep them in a separate bag. You have a place to track your experience points. Just so you know, you don't get a lot of experience points in this game. We got maybe about 4 each over the course of the campaign. Each of those experiences points essentially translates into another skill, which you list over here, all your skills. You're going to start out with maybe about 8 skills. And the only real role of your race and class is that you have to choose some of your skills from lists of skills associated with your race and your class. But you also have some like free slots. You can put whatever skills you want in. And then there's this which you use to track your stamina, which is kind of like your HP. Although there's no real instances in the game that we discovered where you would actually run out of HP and get killed. It's just running out of HP might limit what you can do in certain situations. So after you've gone through this, and I'll go ahead and give sort of my first critique of the game, which is that this is a lot of information if you really want to put some thought into creating your characters. You pretty much have to plan your first session not really even playing the game so much as just spending a session creating characters, which is fine. Again, that's kind of like what I expect from a role-playing game, so I'm used to that, but I didn't really know what to expect going into this game, so I was a little surprised by that. And honestly, my sister and I decided to just go with some pre-generated characters that were provided on the company's website. So that's an option too. But that it took me a little by surprise, and it made me think, you know, if you really wanted to create characters, you'd have to basically read through this whole book. I guess you don't have to read through it all. You could say, well, a dwarf sounds interesting, I'll just read through this page about dwarves and I'll ignore all the pages on all the other races. But if you want to be well informed in making your character, it's going to take a little while to read through all of this. And if you had 6 people together to play the game, then I mean, that would take a long time. People would get frustrated just waiting for everyone else to be done reading through this so they'd have their turn to read through it and start making their character. One thing that is cool about this book is the illustrations. These are pretty much the only illustrations in the game apart from the illustrations on the item cards, and they are some really cool illustrations. I like them a lot, so that is a good thing about this. I guess the only way that you could sort of improve this process is if you took the individual elements of characters, like the races, and you put each of them on their own little info sheet. So for example, if you put each race on their own little info sheet, you could pick up the stack. You could take one race, hand the stack to the next player. They could take one race, hand the stack to the next player. When you're done reading through, say, the dwarves, you pass that along and you get past the elves from somebody else. And that way everyone could be reading at the same time without all standing and looking over their shoulders. But anyway, those are my criticisms about character creation. But it is what it is. So after you've gone through character creation, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to go to this little book, which is called To New Roads. It's a relatively small book, and it is going to be sort of your first adventure. It's your introduction to the game. And part of the reason why the rulebook can be so slim is because this is kind of a tutorial that really walks you through and explains how a lot of the rules of the game work as you're playing through this first scenario. So on the back of this, you have a page, and I'll just go ahead and show you real quick in the bottom of this book. There are a bunch more, total of 5 more of these little adventure books like this one, and all of them are going to have on the back of them a page like this. So what you do with this page is you're going to have something like this. You're going to list the different entries in the book as you read them. So you have sort of a history of your path through the book, sort of. You're also going to have a time track up here where it's split up into 8 pieces of time. They're kind of vague about, is it hours or minutes or whatever. It's flexible depending on what the scenario is. But you have 8 segments of time, and you cross them off as you go through the scenario to track the time. And that's kind of interesting because you might get to certain points in the scenario and it'll say if, 4 or more time has passed, then you find this, otherwise you find that, those types of things. So that's kind of interesting. You might have options in the game where you can choose to do one thing or another, and one of those things will be more time intensive, so it'll tell you to mark time, versus if you just skip by that, take a different route or whatever, you can save time. So that's interesting. And then a lot of these sheets will have a progress track like this, where you mark off progress towards some sort of goal. So you can expect to see those on each of these. So I'll just walk you through this real quick. Again, I don't want to spoil too much, but this is the very first adventure you have. So right away, you're going to see a little sidebar here that's going to give you some instructions. Then you're going to read through this whole half a page of text, which describes your situation. You're traveling with some other people, and there's a little bit of conversation between them. And then it's going to get to your first choice. So your first choice is going to be basically what you say to your traveling companions, and you can tell them, let's make some headway before we lose the light. You can tell them, what else have you heard about these bandits? Or you can tell them, stick close, Miriam, it's dangerous to get separated. And then depending on which choice you make, it'll tell you to go read another entry. So you can see that the entries are all clearly marked. You start on entry 1000. And let's say we go with this first option about let's make some headway. It'll tell you to go to entry 2883. So then we'll just look through this book till we find entry 2883. They're all in numerical order. and the numbers are on the bottom here, so that's a nice touch, makes it easy to find them. So here, this will tell you 2883. You'll read this text, and it'll tell you to mark story point 01. So now let me show you another sheet that comes in the game. This is sort of a master story tracking sheet that you'll be using all throughout the game. And part of it is devoted to story points. So you see it says story points here. It has all these little boxes and rows and columns. So the first column is the A column. And in this little square, you probably can't see it too well, but it says A1. And then it's A2, A3, A4, etc. all the way to A8. And then the next column is the B's, all the way to Z's over here, or Z1 to Z8. And so that told us to mark O1. So we're going to find O1 on here, which is right there, and you will mark that, which obviously is not marked on my sheet, so that's not an option I took when we played through the game. But so that's something you can do. You mark that, and basically that's how the game remembers what you have done. And at later points in the game, when it gets to these choices, it'll sometimes it'll tell you if story point 01 is marked, then go to this entry. Or if story point, B7 is marked, but K2 is not, then go to this entry, and so forth. So that can affect how the story goes as well. Another thing you'll see in like this example here, it gives you some choices, and it'll give you a choice here, but then underneath it, it will say requires Arcana skill, Devotion skill, or Survival skill. So those are some of the skills your character could have, and in order to choose this option, your character would have to have one of those skills. And if not, you could choose this option, which requires different skills, or this option, which requires even different skills, or this option, which requires no skills. So that is basically the extent to which your character that you've created impacts the game, is what skills do you have. The game doesn't usually care about what race your character is or what class, although there was one instance we found where we had a different option because we had someone of a specific race in our party. But generally speaking, the game only cares about what skills you have. And this is how it matters, is if you have certain skills, you have certain options available for you. Now, another critique for the game is that we assumed that having skills is a good thing. And therefore, anytime there's an option that requires a skill, it's probably going to give us a better result than the options that require no skills. And that turned out to be a faulty assumption. So, to me, that's a little counterintuitive, because basically sometimes the option that's kind of like behind a gate, so to speak, like we can't go down this road unless we qualify for it. I would expect that road to produce a better result, but that's not always the case. So that's one sort of, and that may just be on me, my preconceived ideas were incorrect. But that was one thing that threw us off a couple of times when we were like, oh, well, we could do this or we could do that. This requires a skill, that doesn't require a skill, and we have the skill. So we're probably better off using the skill. But no, not necessarily. So I don't know that that's necessarily a negative thing, but it seems a little strange to me. But anyway, yeah, so that basically gives you an idea of how you're going to go through these little adventures. And eventually, as you go through these adventures, you're going to get to a point where you arrive at the actual town of Dragonholt. And then you're going to be working with this much thicker book. This is the book of Dragonholt Village. And you're going to be looking at this sheet. So this is the sheet for Dragonholt Village. It's also on the back of the book, but you can print out a copy of it if you like. And on this, you're going to be tracking time, like I showed you on that other page, but you're going to be doing it by day. So the first day you're in Dragonholt Village, you're going to be running around the village doing things. You might leave the village to go on some of these other adventures. And everything you do is going to take up some of your time. When you have filled up this track of time, it's going to tell you to go read a certain entry in this book, and that entry is basically going to close out the day for you. And it's going to tell you this is a good place to stop, make a note on this sheet here of what entry you're going to come back and read when you're ready to start the next day. And then the next day you're going to start by reading that entry, and then you're going to be running around the village again, or leaving the village to do stuff or whatever, using up this time as you go. On the bottom part of this page, you have some progress tracks. You have progress in heroism, which is basically, you know, just your renown in the village, what you've, yeah, when you do good things around the village, you get known for it and you get recognized for it. And as you develop as a hero, this is how you gain experience points. You can also gain fame. Fame is sort of an odd mechanism because you track it over on this sheet. As you can see, we had 3 fame when it was all over. And for the life of me, I can't remember any point in the story where it mattered if we had any fame or not. So I'm not sure what the point of that mechanism was. But yeah, basically this is gives you experience points. And then you have these other progress tracks. You have academic study, combat training, physical training, social practice, spiritual meditation. You fill up these tracks by doing different things, usually around town, but sometimes on your quests. And once you've maxed out one of these tracks, then you have access to new skills that you can spend your experience points to learn. So that's basically how character progression works in the game. It's a pretty decent system overall. No real complaints there. So that basically explains how the game works. Oh, one thing I didn't show you is the map. The map is important. So once you get to the point where you're working out of this book, at the beginning of each day, you're going to read an entry, and that entry is going to walk you through just a little scene that kind of starts the day off, and then it's going to dump you out on this map. So this map is actually pretty cool. It's a map of the town, and it has various places on it, and as you can see, each of these places has a number associated with it. And so once you've sort of been dumped out on this map, you can go anywhere in the town you like, and you just look up that entry in the big town book to see what's going on there. And there's places like, there's various exits to the town, like the dragon statues are an exit from the town, and that has its own entry. And so those exits are basically how you leave the town to go on these various adventures. Now, I will show you something that's kind of weird about this. So let's say, for example, we have the dragon statues. 1590 is the entry number for those. So we go to this book, we go to entry 1590. And again, this isn't going to be a big spoiler, it's just something kind of odd. So notice it's 1590, dragon statues. It gives a little description of the dragon statues, and then it says, if it is day 3 and story point A4 is marked, read this entry. If it is day 3 and story point A4 is not marked, read a different entry. If it is day 6 and 6 or more time has passed and story point M2 is marked, read another entry. Otherwise, nothing of interest is happening here right now. This encounter is complete. 2 things I want to say about this. One is, it is kind of cool that they have sort of this system, and a lot of the places in town have a system like this, in that you go to the place, it gives you a quick description of the place, and then it asks you like, well, if this amount of time has passed, then the bakery is closed, nothing's happening here, end of encounter. Or it'll say, if, you know, this much time or less has passed and the bakery's open, you go in, it sends you to, you know, some other entry and something happens in the bakery, for example. And so that is a cool aspect of the game, because it creates a sort of sense of like, this is a living town, things are happening in the town, people are going about their day, regardless of whether I show up or not. And that is pretty cool. I like that a lot. And it also, that time element makes it so you're kind of, once you get an idea of how the village works, you're sort of thinking about your day, and you're like, well, we could go out on this adventure that we know we can leave the town to do, but how long is that going to take? And if we go do that right away, when we come back, will the apothecary shop still be open so we can stop in and buy potions, or should we buy potions before we leave town? And I want to visit, this place, which is, you have like shops like the apothecary shop and the bakery that are only open during the day, and then you have taverns that are only open at night. And so, you have to kind of plan out your day, and that's a really neat aspect of the game. But here's what's kind of weird is, let's say we visit the dragon statues on day one, which we did. The first day in the town, we're just looking around at places to visit. We went to the dragon statue. Nothing's happening at the dragon statues on day one, but right away we knew that something is going to happen on day 3 and day 6 at the statues. So you can bet we made a mental note of that. Actually, I think we put a note on a piece of paper, and we made sure that we came back on day 3 and day 6 to see what was going on there. And that's kind of weird. It sort of takes you out of the narrative of the story, because there's no way your characters should know that anything is happening on day 3 or day 6 at this location. But the way the game works, there's no way to get around knowing that. And so that's kind of weird. And there's a lot of stuff like that, especially, around the town, where just visiting a place will let you know when something important is going to happen there. And so you can make notes to come back at those times so you don't miss those events. Which is just kind of strange. It takes you out of the narrative a little bit. I'm going to leave the desk. I'm going to go back up top, and I'm going to give you some more thoughts about the game, having basically given you a good idea of what's involved in the game and how it works. All right, so hopefully that was a pretty good overview of the game in general. One thing that I forgot to get back to was these activation tokens. So this is just a mechanism that you use to kind of control who makes what decisions, so you don't have one person just making all the decisions for the group over and over. I think maybe in a group of 3 or more players, these would be useful. But for just 2 players, I found that my sister and I just went back and forth. I'd make a decision, she'd make a decision, etc. And by like the 3rd session, we didn't even pull these out of the box. So, it is what it is. It might have been useful in a larger group. I already shared a lot of my thoughts that I could share without getting into spoilers. I will talk a little bit about the writing, again, without going into spoilers. My impression, first of all, in the first session, which is kind of that tutorial adventure, it felt very slow, and it felt like a lot of reading just to get anywhere. The writing itself is nice. It's very descriptive. It's very easy to picture what's going on. So I like that. It did seem a little long-winded. So like when the first session was over, I felt like, I'm not really super excited about anything that's happening here. But I felt like it had potential. The second session was our first day in town. We're running all over the place, doing as much as we can in the town. And the thing that was kind of strange about that, so basically you get into town, again, not spoiling anything, but going into the game that you're coming into this town to investigate a mysterious death and possibly a conspiracy. The first day, we're running around trying to do as much investigating as we can, and basically we hit a dead road where it's like, okay, we'll just have to wait and see what other evidence shows up. In the meantime, try to get the people on your side. Try and be a hero, get the people on your side, because it could be that down the road we'll really need the support of the village. So I was like, okay, they're trying to, pace this out a little bit. Don't make it all about investigating this mystery. But it was interesting. That second day, the second session, the first day in town, that was interesting. The second session, we had picked up some rumors about some different things that we could maybe leave town to go do, some sort of like side quests we could go on. And so the second day, we right away went off on one of these side quests. Then we came back to town. We visited a few places around town again. and then that was it. That was the second day. The third day, we right away, first thing when you start the day, that first entry, they tell you that you're supposed to read. Something is happening, and it's like a big deal, and you need to respond to it. And this was one of the things that irritated us the most about the game. So somebody comes and they ask you for help with this thing. It sounds really important, really urgent. You have to talk to one other person before you get past that first like introductory scene, and that person's like, well, it sounds like that sounds really important. I hope you know, like, are successful on this thing that you have to go do. You should also go talk to this person in town before you leave. They might have something that could help you. So we're like, okay, that sounds reasonable, right? I mean, we're in a hurry, but no reason we couldn't stop by one place on our way out, talk to someone. Maybe they'll have something helpful for us. So we go and we visit this other place, talk to this other person. And basically we ended up spending all morning with this other person in town. We had one chance to peel away after we had spent like some time with them. We spent some time with them and we're like, this doesn't seem to be helping us, but we'll stick around a little bit longer because this other character specifically told us we should go see this person before we leave town. So we stuck around a little bit longer, and again, it was like we got no advantage for it. They didn't do anything to help us. And finally we're like, well, we've spent too much time here already. We need to go. So we went, we did our quest. The quest went really poorly. And what was really frustrating about it is that the quest would have gone 100% better if we had just not taken that detour and spent time with that character before leaving town. Now, perhaps the intention is that we as players should have put ourselves into like the shoes of our characters and been like, well, no, this is a too urgent of a situation. There's no way we're going to waste time with anything. We're going to get out of here. We're going to go take care of this situation right away. But at the same time, it's like, I guess maybe I've played a lot of role-playing games, and if the game master, the person who's running the role-playing game, like drops you a hint that like, oh, maybe this person can help you out, like usually the game master is not trying to screw you over and make you waste time on something when you should be somewhere else doing something else, you know? And then I guess, you know, my sister and I both played video games where it's like, oh, we're trying to like save the princess and, you know, rescue the princess, save the kingdom, do all this kind of stuff. But of course we have time to like run around and help you gather up your chickens for like an upgrade to our purse. Like, of course we have time for that. So maybe there was some of that mentality there as well. But it was just really frustrating in retrospect when we look back and we realized, because we followed the advice of this one character who we had to speak to, they were going to give us that advice. There's nothing we did to go out of our way to get their advice. It was automatically built into the narrative. But because we followed their advice, it completely ruined our chances on that quest. And that just felt like a really, like if I was playing a role-playing game and the game master had done that to me, I would be probably ready to quit that campaign, because that just was so frustrating. It's like, why did you mess me up like that? You know? So that was probably the worst part about the game overall, because that changed the whole direction and outcome of the story from that point on. So that was really frustrating. So, I mean, you could take that as a warning that like, hey, when you get to day 3, don't waste any time, go out on that quest right away. Or you could just take that as maybe this isn't a game for you if it's going to have situations like that where the game almost intentionally screws you over. And then I guess some other thoughts about that, without going into too many spoilers, is like day 4, we went on another quest, and it was kind of weird because the quest that we went on day 4 seems like it was meant to be the first side quest you go on. And the reason I say that is because we had gone on a side quest on day 2, then we had this quest that we had to go on day 3, and then we did this other side quest on day 4. And the quest on day 4 was much more simple, much more streamlined as far as the different options you had and the choices you had. So in that way, it seemed much more like, oh, this is your first side quest than the one we did on day 2. And we got an item in that side quest that would have helped us a lot in the sort of forced quest that we had to do on day 3. Now, that wouldn't seem weird too much, except that it was much easier to find the different things that were pointing to the quest we did on day 2 than the quest we did on day 4. So if the intention, if the intention was for us to go on that day 4 quest on day 2 instead of the other way around, then the clues that would point us to that quest should have been a lot more visible than the clues that pointed us to the other quest. And I'm being kind of trying to be vague here so I don't give too much away. But yeah, it just seemed like a bad design from that perspective of like, if it's going to be best for the players to go through things a certain way, like it's cool to have options, you know, like you can learn about this quest, you can learn about that quest, and then you can kind of decide which one you want to go on and, you know, in what order and so forth. Like, that's cool, but if there's going to be a way that is definitely better for the players, then the clues that would lead you to those quests should be arranged in such a way that it's more likely you'll take the intended path. And it wasn't. It was to the contrary. So I found that a little frustrating, and just like it was poorly designed. And then it was kind of weird because, like I said, we spent one day where we're just like, investigate this conspiracy, possible murder thing. Spend a whole day working on that, and kind of got to a point where it's like, okay, we're not going to make any more progress on this right now. So then the next day we went on this quest, and that was pretty cool. And then the next day we had this kind of forced quest we had to go on, which was still fine, except the way it turned out, but I already explained that. Day 3, we went on this other optional quest, which was fine. And then after that, you still have to go through day 4, 5, 6, and 7. And basically, we had no more optional quests. We had one more, like, forced quest that came on, I think, like, day 5. And then we had, or maybe it was 6. Well, one or the other. And then we had, like, one final forced quest that came at the very end of day 7. But there were a couple of days where it just felt like we didn't have a whole lot to do except go around town and interact with people, which was fine. But it just felt kind of lopsided. It felt like we had like a lot of action the first 4 days, and then it was just kind of like, we'll go study in the library for a while to like work on our academic skills because we don't have anything else to do. And then another thing that I found frustrating about the game in the way it was created was, like I said, it's the premise is all about this conspiracy, and at first you get there and you do a bunch of investigating, and there's a few points throughout the week where you get some other opportunities to do a little bit of investigating, and this is where it's a bit spoilery. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to go full spoilers now. Not total spoilers, but as much spoiling as I'm going to do now. So at this point, if you don't want any spoilers, I'd say cut out right now. I think I've expressed my general frustration with the game, although it does have some, it has some good ideas. The system itself is pretty interesting, has potential, but I found the narrative of the game overall very frustrating. So you can stop right there if you don't want spoilers. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And if you're still around now, I'm going to assume you're okay with some spoilers. So here we go. So it's all about this conspiracy. You're trying to uncover this conspiracy, and yet the way the game ends, it doesn't matter whether or how much you've investigated the conspiracy, because it's going to come down to the final adventure is like there's this masquerade ball, and there's the bad guys attempt to like assassinate the countess and her daughter at this masquerade ball. Like that's what they're going to do, and there's no amount of investigating can, help you figure that out and stop it before it happens. I mean, you can prevent the assassination, but you can't prevent the attempt at the assassination. So it really doesn't matter how much you investigate. Then another thing is, in the beginning they tell you, like, you start investigating on day one, and they're like, okay, well, we have some clues, we have some leads, but we're going to have to take our time and look into this further. In the meantime, try to help the people in town, try to get them on your side, because who knows, when everything comes down to it, that may make a big difference, having all these people on your side. And it didn't. I mean, the ending of the game played out the same way. There was nowhere where it was like, oh, because you have so much fame, or because you've made friends with this person and this person and that person, then the story takes a different path. It's like, no, it doesn't. It's just at the end, what happens, happens. And you have some, not that you don't have any influence over what happens at the end, but it's just the scenario that plays out at the end. That scenario is always going to play out regardless of what else you've done in the game. The specifics of what happens in the scenario you can manipulate by your choices in the scenario. But as far as the events leading up to that scenario, nothing you do is going to change whether the assassination attempt happens, whether you have help in dealing with it. None of that. It's just, it was completely pointless. There was no, it's like the game was, I felt like the game continually was directing you like, this is important, you should do this. And then at the end it was like, nope, that wasn't important. It's like, this is important, you should investigate. It doesn't matter how much you investigate. Oh, this is important, you should make friends. It doesn't matter how hard you try to make friends. So, yeah, that was just really frustrating. Another thing that is just kind of weird to me, this game seems very concerned about representation, which I think is good. There's a lot of strong female characters in this story, which is pretty cool. There are a variety of people of different complexions, hair color, skin color, etc. described, and I think that's really cool. But there are characters that exist solely to be different. And I feel like that kind of weakens it as a story. And just to give an example, like, there's a young single father that shows up about halfway through the story, and he exists in the story just to be a young single father. Like, that's it. I mean, it's kind of cool to have a young single father. Like, I know there are young single fathers out there who probably feel like, hey, how come there aren't more young single fathers in stories? But to have a character in the narrative who's a young single father just so there's a young single father in the story feels unnecessary. And it feels so deliberate that it kind of detracts from the believability of the story. And there were other characters like that who fell into these sort of, very, minorities or disadvantaged people, or just people who aren't generally represented in stories. And again, it's kind of cool to see some of that in here. But there were a lot of characters who, it's like they existed only to be an example of that. And it kind of makes me feel like there was this kids show that I remember watching when I was a kid, and it started out with like 4 main characters. They were all like white kids. And then in the second season, they introduced a 5th character who was a black kid. And he never really integrated with the other 4 characters fully, because the other 4 characters, like, they had fully formed personalities. They had like different relationship dynamics between them. And then the 5th kid always felt like the 5th wheel, like he'd never really fully integrated into the group. And it just was like, it almost made it to me, I mean, this is coming from a white guy, so maybe I don't have the right perspective on this, but to me it almost seemed like insulting. Like, so you just threw in a black kid just to have a black kid. And a lot of the characters in the story feel that way. You know, it's like you couldn't actually make a real character who would represent this type of person or this group of people. You just made, you know, it's just like there's a token disabled person and a token, academic atheist and, you know, token single dad. Like there's characters like that in the story, and it just, to me, that takes away from the narrative more than it adds to the narrative. Like, I would love it if there was a main character who was a young single dad, because that'd be cool. But it's not an important character. The character doesn't do anything. They exist solely to be a representation of that demographic. And I feel like they could have done a lot better. Or, you know, just try not to represent so many different demographics. You know, some representation is good. But I feel like they went overboard in this particular game. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Overall, this probably sounds like a pretty negative review, and I would say that overall it was a pretty negative experience, especially about halfway through when I felt like the game was just kind of screwing with me and deliberately throwing red herrings at me that caused me to do worse on, you know, pivotal quests, and then just as the game progressed, and especially when we got towards the end and it was like, wait a minute, like it doesn't matter how much investigating we could have done, like no amount of investigating would have helped us prevent this situation. You know, they told us we should make friends with people in the village. No amount of doing that would have changed the outcome of the story. The game does have like 4 different endings. One of them is a really bad ending. One of them is a really good ending. The other 2 are like variations on a sort of medium ending. We got one of the variations on the medium ending. But again, it was like that day 3 quest that went south was the pivotal thing that split it, where it made it impossible for us to get the very best ending. So yeah, that was frustrating. Yeah, so anyway, those are my thoughts on Legacy of Dragonholt. Thanks for watching my video and bearing with me on this review. Hopefully that gives you some insight into the game, into the systems of the game, the narrative of the game. Again, the writing in general is nice. It's pleasant to read. It's pleasant to listen to. There's a lot of elements of the system of the game that I enjoy. I think it has a lot of potential. But I feel like they made a lot of poor choices in the overall narrative of the story and the player's ability to influence the narrative. So, yep, that's it. Those are my thoughts on Legacy of Dragonholt. Again, my name is Nathan. This is Nice at Dice. Thank you so much for watching, and you enjoy the rest of your day.